Joining me now is former National Security Advisor and former Ambassador to the UN, John Bolton. Ambassador Bolton, thank you so much for being here. What a weekend this has been. 3 objects shot down since Friday. And of course, this all comes in the wake of the Chinese spy balloon being shot down. As a former National Security Advisor, taking a look at this, what do you think is going on here?
Well, I've had some experience with confusion, disarray, and disorder in the White House, and what I sense here is confusion, disarray, and disorder. And I think part of it is there are new discoveries, perhaps because of modifications to the technical aspects of surveillance. I think that's probably a plus. You learn from your earlier mistakes. But honestly, a good part of this, I think, has come from the administration trying to make it up as it goes along, covering its posterior, as we say, and making initial assessments on the Chinese balloon in particular that turned out to be incorrect.
I want to kind of walk through the various reactions we saw, but let me just read something that you wrote, an op-ed in the New York Post today. You wrote, quote, "In today's threatening world, any unidentified object nearing U.S. territory should be deemed intrinsically suspicious. NORAD apparently presumed exactly the opposite related to the Chinese spy balloon." So, given that, how do you assess the speed with which they shot down the 3 objects? We still don't know what they were over the weekend. Was it in response to that? Was it too fast, or was it the right move?
Well, we just don't know because they either don't know or haven't released enough information. But it does go to the mistake on the first balloon where the commander of NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, said, "I assessed it was not hostile." Well, was it because they weren't playing the East is Red on a transmission from the balloon? It was as big as 3 buses. It was 200 feet tall. Could we say with certainty it didn't carry a nuclear device? Could we say with certainty it didn't have biological pathogens and toxins? We didn't really know, but it sailed all the way across the country. And I think that was a huge mistake.
And one of the arguments, of course, that the Pentagon has made is, look, they were concerned about falling debris, that it would hurt people on the ground. What do you make of that argument? Is that not a valid reation to not shoot it down?
Certainly, you have to be concerned about the safety of innocent civilians, apparently, unless they live in the Yukon in Canada. There are large spaces in the United States, particularly in Alaska and Montana, that are sparsely populated with aggressive efforts using the National Guard, local law enforcement. A lot of things could have been done to bring it down on land, and not necessarily by firing a Sidewinder missile in it. There could have been other ways to bring it down more slowly. I can't believe we don't have the technology to do that. If we don't, now's the time to develop it. But the first problem, and it's absolutely fundamental, is the presumption that it's not firing as it comes into our territory. It wasn't demonstrating hostile intent. It was unidentified. It was heading toward our territory. And I just heard this morning on this network that that first balloon actually was tracked from Hainan Island, south of China. If that's correct, then it's even more inexplicable.
So let me just play something, because we have learned now, in the wake of this Chinese spy balloon, that there were 3 balloons that the Pentagon has now become aware of during the Trump administration. I want to play something that John Kirby said today and get your reaction on the other side.
We were able to determine that China has a high-altitude balloon program for intelligence collection that's connected to the People's Liberation Army. It was operating during the previous administration, but they did not detect it. We detected it. We tracked it. And we have been carefully studying it to learn as much as we can.
Pointed words there from John Kirby, who says they did not detect it. What's your reaction to that? Do you see that as a failure that it wasn't detected?
Yeah, I think that's another political shot, though. The administration has now changed its story on precisely that point multiple times. First, they said it happened, but it wasn't detected. Then they said it happened, but it was assessed to be a weather phenomenon. Those are all things that go on at the NORAD level, perfectly understandably. And if there were failures, then indeed they were failures that occurred that were not reported up. Every senior Trump administration national security official has said they know nothing about it. So I think this idea that we can try and blame it on the prior administration is just not correct. We were never confronted, at least I'm not aware of it, with a decision, what do you do about a balloon that's coming toward the coast of Alaska?
And I just want to be very clear on that point. A balloon or any other object, you were never aware of any object entering U.S. airspace that was of concern.
That's right.
Okay. And given that, I guess, do you think that part of the concern about these three objects, and over the weekend, the Pentagon has said they've expanded what they are looking for on their radar effectively. Is that the right way to go about it, or are you concerned there could be a misfire here?
Well, I think expanding the scope of our capabilities makes sense given the circumstances we're in now, and it should lead to the question, how many others like this have we missed? And why is it that all of a sudden we seem to be finding these things not on the exterior of the country, but well inside the continent? So I think there's a lot going on here in terms of public information. We just don't know enough. But again, it comes to the fundamental attitude. If China says it's a weather balloon, do we just accept that when it's patently a lie?
Very quickly, we're talking a lot about China, but we don't know where these objects came from this weekend. What are the key concerns for you? I mean, what are the other countries in your mind right now?
Well, how about North Korea to start with? That's why
do they have the capability to do something like this?
We don't know, and that's until we find out the provenance of these latest three objects, it's hard to speculate. But the basic point is anything coming at us in the low atmosphere, in the high atmosphere, or via ballistic missile trajectory should be treated as inherently suspicious and act accordingly. People say, well, you may fire too early. That's a risk. That's certainly correct. We ought to do more to think about it. But the blithe assumption that this first balloon could fly across the entire country because we were gathering intelligence on it, I think it gathered a lot more on us.
Well, and they do say, and the White House and the Pentagon have said that they are now studying, of course, what they are finding at the site of where they shot that balloon down. Let me ask you, because you talk about in your op-ed, and you've talked about previously, that you are expecting a briefing about this by the current administration. Can you update us on that? Have you had any conversations about a potential briefing?
Well, they contacted me last week, and I'm scheduled to have a briefing on Wednesday. I'm looking forward to it. I have even more questions now than when they first got in touch with me.
And do you know specifically who will be briefing you?
I don't. Those arrangements, I take it, are being made.
Okay, and will you be the first Trump administration official to be briefed? Will there be other officials there with you, do you know?
I don't know. It'll be exciting to find out.
Okay, well, you'll have to come back and update us after the briefing. Ambassador, let's turn to the issue of classified documents. In December, you said there's a, quote, substantial possibility that former President Trump could be indicted over his handling of classified documents. Since then, we know that President Biden has found classified documents in his possession. Former Vice President Mike Pence has found classified documents. Does that change your assessment in any way? Do you still think the former president could be indicted over this?
Well, I think he could be. I think there are other aspects other than the documents that the special counsel looking into him could indict. But I think Trump is the luckiest politician in America. Excuse me, when President Biden discovered classified documents, I think it's nearly impossible, not as a matter of law, but as a matter of politics, to prosecute Trump, but not to prosecute the sitting president.
And of course, as you know, the FBI recently searched former Vice President Mike Pence's home. There's a special counsel to investigate former President Trump and President Biden. Should there be a special counsel appointed to look into the Pence matter as well?
Absolutely not. And frankly, there shouldn't be special counsels on the first two matters. I've been through this since the Reagan administration. I think the concept of a special counsel, whether it's enshrined in statute or Department of Justice regulation, is a mistake. I believe the department is capable of conducting impartial investigations. If the Attorney General has to recuse himself, let a U.S. attorney do it.
Well, given that, and given that now there are these two special counsels, do you think, for the sake of fairness and making sure that everyone is treated the same under the law, I understand what you're saying, that fundamentally you disagree with special counsels, but in this instance, do you think they need to appoint one for Vice President Pence?
I don't, because I don't think the three cases are the same. And in the case of Vice President Pence, I think every bit of evidence they've accumulated so far will point to inadequacies in the overall process of packing out presidents and vice presidents. Vice President Pence is the last person I would suspect of taking classified documents, period.
Yeah, and he has been clear that he is cooperating with authorities. Very quickly before we move on, given that you have said You are not ruling out a potential run for office in 2024. Have you searched through all of your documents? Are you confident you don't have any classified documents in your possession?
Yes, I don't believe I do.
Okay, let's talk about 2024. Last time you were on this show, you said you were thinking about it, and you used this language. You said that you would run if the potential Republican field didn't fully denounce former President Trump. We really haven't seen that yet. So are you in?
Well, I'm still considering. I'm not in yet, but I do think it's very important. And I think the more people I talk to, the more convinced I become that Trump can't possibly get the Republican Party nomination, but that the taint that he represents and the potential of his negative reaction against the Republican nominee, just out of spite, really makes it important to separate ourselves from him. The further we can do that, the more I think we can convince a majority of the American people that they need a new president in 2024. And if we don't do that, I think we risk another disappointing outcome like we just had.
Can you update us on your thinking? Are you now more likely to run than not, given that? And what's your timeline and deadline for making that decision?
Well, I wouldn't say one way or the other, but I do think that the pace of this whole process seems to have slowed down somewhat. There's a lot of activity beneath the surface. And there will be a declaration of candidacy this Wednesday, we expect. But I don't feel rushed, and I think a lot depends on who else gets in. I'm not going to do this as a gesture. I don't believe in virtue signaling. If I get in, it would be to get in to win.
And of course, Nikki Haley is, as you just referenced, expected to get into the race this week. What is your reaction to her candidacy? And do you have a lane once she's in the race? You're both two former Trump administration officials who focused on foreign policy.
Yeah, well, I think Nikki's really running for vice president. That's my sense. I think she has a problem because she first said she wouldn't run if President Trump ran. And her justification for changing was that a lot of things have changed, which I don't think is very convincing. I think people know where I stand on Trump.
So you think she has a credibility problem going into this race?
I think Trump will have a lot of fun with her.
Do you anticipate in any way that if you don't get into this race that you would support a Nikki Haley candidacy? I know you're saying she may be the vice presidential nominee at some point, but would you support her, or is that a problem for you, the fact that she's flip-flopped on that key point?
Well, I think that's a problem. I think I quoted Mike Pompeo in my book, something he said about Nikki Haley. He said, she's light as a feather.
Okay, since you take me to Mike Pompeo, let me quote you something that he said about you. He has had some harsh words for you in his memoir, accusing you of, quote, constantly scheming. What's your reaction to him? What do you make of his potential candidacy?
Well, that would make me the only person in the entire administration who was scheming, I suppose. I mean, this is welcome to Washington. Look, I think he has problems with his candidacy. I think great disappointment to me was during our time together in the administration, he let his ambition outrun his principles, his desire to become Trump's best boy, at which he was very successful. I think that would be a real problem for him in November, were he the party nominee.
All right, Ambassador John Bolton, thank you so much. We hope you will come back when you have a final decision and update us.
Indeed.
We really appreciate it. We appreciate your insights as well.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.